Iran is ablaze. Sanctions are tightening, bombs are falling, pressure is closing in from all directions. Yet, Russia and China remain still. No aid, no commitments. Iran has fallen into disaster. Alone. Why? In the final days of the escalating conflict between Iran and Israel, many surprising developments occurred. Most notably, the United States made the shocking decision to directly engage in the war by launching airstrikes on Iran's key nuclear facilities. This action stunned the world. Numerous experts predicted that President Donald Trump's move would provoke the two major powers, Russia and China, into action, using the pretext of aiding Tehran. However, contrary to those fears, neither Beijing nor Moscow made any significant move, aside from issuing a few words of condemnation. Some argued that Russia and China had no obligation to support Iran in its war, as there were no binding defense agreements between them. That may be technically true, but let's revisit the history of goodwill and cooperation that these nations have shared. Earlier this year, Russia and Iran signed a comprehensive strategic partnership agreement, which was officially ratified on the 21st of last month. Both sides described the pact as a milestone that would not only strengthen economic and trade cooperation, but also open a new chapter in security and defense. Moscow and Tehran vowed to jointly resist Western sanctions and respond to geopolitical upheaval. China, on its end, had also pursued a 25-year strategic cooperation plan with Iran as part of its ambitious Belt and Road Initiative. With all this, Tehran had every reason to hope that its two powerful allies would come to its aid in the conflict with Israel. But while the US stood firmly behind Israel, Iran had to fend for itself. So why are Russia and China remaining silent? Let's first talk about Russia. After the collapse of the Soviet Union, Russia's influence in the Middle East significantly diminished. It wasn't until 2015 that Moscow regained some of that influence by intervening militarily in Syria to save President Assad's regime from collapse during the Arab Spring. Since then, the relationship between Moscow and Tehran had grown stronger. Both nations had a shared goal: to preserve Assad's leadership in Syria. According to joint agreements, Russia was to provide essential air support to Iranian, Syrian, and Hezbollah ground operations. Beyond the battlefield, the two countries expanded their arms trade cooperation.
At the time, Russia was facing economic hardship due to sanctions and falling oil prices. Selling weapons to Iran provided a crucial economic lifeline. Establishing weapons trade channels between Russia and Iran also allowed Moscow to expand its reach into Iraq, Yemen, and Libya, where Iran had various allies.
More than that, Iran was the first country to openly support Moscow's special military operation in Ukraine. Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, publicly backed the war during a meeting with President Vladimir Putin. He stated, "War is a harsh and painful matter, and we are deeply saddened by the suffering of civilians. But in the case of Ukraine, if you had not taken the initiative, the other side would have struck first." Iran not only offered rhetorical support, it also provided Russia with missiles and drones. In the summer of 2022, Iranian-made Shahid drones appeared over Ukrainian skies, quickly becoming a critical asset for the Russian military. These drones proved so effective that the Kremlin began ordering 2,700 units per month. Iran even transferred drone manufacturing technology to Moscow, helping Russia produce its own Gedan-2 variant. With all of this support, Iran expected reciprocity, but reality turned out to be different.
The Kremlin remained reluctant to get involved. Instead, it offered Tehran only verbal support. Although the strategic agreement included military cooperation, it did not contain any mutual defense clause. This omission reveals a lack of full trust between the two nations. Despite Iran's repeated requests for military aid, Russia has refused to deliver Su-35 fighter jets and S-400 air defense systems.
Following Israel's initial airstrikes on Iran, Russia made no strong move other than expressing deep concern about rising tensions in the Middle East and issuing mild condemnations. Afterward, the Kremlin offered to mediate between the two sides and even proposed taking custody of Tehran's enriched uranium in an effort to diffuse tensions. That was all they did. Some analysts noted that Iran never sent troops to support Russia in Ukraine, unlike North Korea, which provided direct manpower. That may be a reason why Moscow now refrains from repaying the favor. Moreover, Russia's Gulf interests also weigh heavily in its calculations. Countries like Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates do not want the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, IRGC, to acquire advanced weaponry. Thus, Moscow would be taking a major risk by arming Tehran. The reason is simple. Russia doesn't want to jeopardize its growing ties with Gulf states. In an effort to evade Western sanctions, the Kremlin has long pursued a look east policy, with the Gulf being a key pillar. Moscow views establishing influence in the Gulf as a top foreign policy priority, especially in trade, energy, and technology, which are crucial for both sides. The UAE has now become Russia's top trading partner in the region, with bilateral trade reaching $11.4 billion in 2023. Over 700 Russian companies are now registered in the Emirates, turning it into a hub for sanctions evasion. What's happened? According to the BBC, the number of Russian billionaires and entrepreneurs relocating to the UAE has reached unprecedented levels. In Dubai, Russian real estate purchases soared by 2/3 in the first quarter of 2022 alone. Beyond the UAE, Moscow is also actively expanding its relations with Qatar. While trade volume is still relatively low, the Kremlin sees Doha as a key partner for building energy and logistics supply chains. Saudi Arabia is no exception. Its bilateral trade with Russia is expected to reach $5 billion in the coming years. Moscow doesn't want to lose these promising partnerships, which makes it understandable why Russia prefers that Iran handle its own war. There is another factor. Moscow also wants to maintain cordial ties with Israel, just as it does with Tehran. Israel has been a reliable partner in other areas, including supplying hundreds of drones developed by Israeli defense companies. Israel is also one of Russia's largest energy partners, providing the Kremlin with massive profits. So why sacrifice that relationship just to help Iran? Even if Moscow wanted to support Tehran, it probably couldn't. Russia is deeply bogged down in its war in Ukraine and simply doesn't have the resources to fight on two fronts. Since the launch of the special military operation, not only Iran, but several of Russia's other close allies have also had to fend for themselves. In 2022, Azerbaijan shelled Armenia, then a member of the Russia-led CSTO alliance. Despite Armenia's appeals to Moscow and the UN Security Council, Russia did not take any decisive action. A year later, Azeri forces launched an offensive to retake Nagorno-Karabakh, most of which was under Armenian control. Even though Russian peacekeepers were stationed there, Moscow merely called for calm and urged both sides to avoid civilian casualties. This left Armenia bitterly disappointed. Its prime minister eventually suspended participation in the CSTO, stating, "We believe the collective defense agreement failed to protect Armenia, especially during 2021 to 2022. This cannot be overlooked." Another Russian ally, President Bashar al-Assad's regime in Syria, fared even worse. When Damascus came under severe pressure from opposition forces, Moscow could do little more than help evacuate Assad himself. All of this unfolded while Russia was deeply entangled in the Ukraine war. According to reports from Ukrainian sources, over 1 million Russian soldiers have died since the war began. While this number is unverified, the scale of Russian losses undeniably limits its ability to assist Iran with troops or weapons. Russia is not the only major power Iran had hoped to rely on. Tehran has another strong ally in Asia, China. Arguably even closer than Russia, Iran and China established diplomatic ties in 1971, when the People's Republic of China gained its permanent seat on the United Nations Security Council. After the 1979 Islamic Revolution, Tehran gradually saw Beijing as a potential strategic partner. That relationship deepened, especially during the Gulf War era, when China willingly provided military, economic, and technological assistance to Iran.
In the early 21st century, the two countries became increasingly close. For Beijing, Iran represented both an important market and a highly valuable source of energy.
After Washington withdrew from the nuclear deal in 2018 and reimposed sanctions on Iran, Tehran moved even closer to Beijing. By 2021, both sides had signed a 25-year comprehensive strategic partnership agreement. As part of the deal, China pledged to invest more than $400 billion into Iran's oil, telecommunications, ports, railways, and other sectors. In exchange, China secured access to discounted crude oil, making it Iran's top trading partner and its largest oil customer. The relationship also included military cooperation. Chinese naval forces even conducted joint drills with Iran and Russia. Yet, despite this deepening partnership, during the most recent Iran-Israel conflict, Beijing made no clear move to assist its close ally. China's military aid to Iran was virtually non-existent. While Beijing issued public statements criticizing Israel, it carefully maintained cooperation with both sides, protecting its own interests and the safety of its citizens in the region. When the U.S. conducted direct airstrikes on Iranian territory, China condemned Washington for violating the United Nations Charter. escalating tensions in the Middle East and damaging global nuclear non-proliferation efforts. At the same time, Beijing called on all parties, especially Israel, to exercise restraint, cease hostilities, and prevent further escalation. But that was the extent of China's involvement. No weapons, no troops, no material support.
This inaction is rooted in China's long-standing foreign policy principles of non-intervention and strategic neutrality. Unlike the US or Russia, China traditionally avoids entangling itself in other nations' security guarantees. Instead, it prefers to play the role of a neutral mediator during global crises.
Moreover, the Iran-Israel war has little direct impact on China. Though Tehran is a key oil supplier to Beijing, China can easily shift its purchases elsewhere, especially to Russia. Additionally, China has a powerful backup plan: its growing ties with Iran's regional rival, Saudi Arabia. To Chinese policymakers, Riyadh serves as a perfect springboard to expand Beijing's influence in the Arab world. Trade between China and Saudi Arabia has surged since the 2000s, reaching nearly $90 billion by 2021. China is now the kingdom's largest oil customer, importing close to 2 million barrels per day. That's why Beijing will not risk those ties by supporting Iran too openly. Another factor behind China's muted stance is domestic public opinion. Since the conflict began, Chinese media platforms and blogs have been flooded with critical commentary about Iran. Many posts highlight Iran's internal economic problems, outdated technology, and its limited military capabilities. Overall, Chinese public sentiment toward Iran is lukewarm at best, and certainly not supportive. Just like Russia, China may actually benefit quietly from rising tensions between Iran and Israel. A prolonged Middle Eastern crisis could keep the United States occupied for years, potentially distracting Washington from Asia-Pacific issues, including Taiwan. In short, despite its long and deep relationship with Iran, China cannot be counted on as a strategic lifeline in times of crisis. There's another reason why Iran hasn't received concrete support from Russia or China, and it lies in Iran's own national character. Iran is a nation with a strong sense of sovereignty and self-determination. It has always sought to maintain a high degree of independence, minimizing reliance on outside powers. Iran's leadership understands that any assistance, even from allies, comes with strings attached. In today's international landscape, diplomacy is driven by realism and pragmatism, and both Russia and China have their own mounting challenges to deal with. Neither is in a position to extend major help to another country. This trend is likely to continue, especially as great power competition intensifies in the coming years. In light of that, Iran has no illusions about forming a true military alliance with Russia or China. Instead of waiting for help from Moscow or Beijing, Tehran has proactively built its own sphere of influence by developing what it calls the axis of resistance. This includes a network of armed groups such as Hezbollah, Hamas, and others aligned with Iranian interests. For years, this strategy has helped Iran maintain a strong presence in the Middle East, despite crushing sanctions, military pressure, and diplomatic isolation. Iran has invested heavily in its domestic defense industry, especially in missile systems, UAVs, drones, and electronic warfare. This has given Iran a level of deterrence that few in the region can afford to ignore. The clearest evidence of this was demonstrated in the recent 12-day conflict, during which the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps primarily used indigenous missiles and drones to launch attacks on enemy territory. It's clear that Iran has chosen the path of self-reliance, defending its interests and asserting its position on the world stage without waiting for outside help. In today's chaotic and power-centric world, no alliance is truly permanent. Russia and China may have once stood shoulder to shoulder with Iran, but ultimately, national interests come first. Tehran may have hoped for greater support, but the reality of international politics is this: solidarity is conditional, and survival depends on internal strength. In the geopolitical chessboard, loyalty is not free, and Iran has realized that the only sure path forward is to rely on its own power, militarily, politically, and economically.